The war had been going on for 3 years. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the command deck of his ship, looking at the planet below. Draxar Prime was covered in metal fortresses and weapons. The enemy had built their strongest base there. They were making a terrible weapon that could destroy entire star systems. Jake was 32 years old. He had fought in many battles. His face showed scars from old wounds. His brown eyes were hard and determined. He was a soldier who never gave up no matter how bad things got. Other species in the galaxy knew about humans like him. Humans were famous for fighting even when they should run away. "Sir, we're ready," said one of his soldiers. Jake looked at his team. 47 men and women stood ready to fight. They knew this mission was almost impossible. The enemy had more than 10,000 soldiers on that planet. They had shields, guns, and ships in space above them. But Jake's team had to try. If they failed, billions of people would die. "Let's go," Jake said quietly. His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the steel in it. They loaded into their dropships and fell toward the planet like stones. The enemy fired at them. Ships exploded around them. Jake's ship shook hard but kept flying. They crashed through the atmosphere and hit the ground running. The battle was fierce. Jake's team moved like shadows through the enemy fortress. They didn't fight fair. They used tricks, traps, and surprise attacks. Humans were good at finding weaknesses that other species missed. They were good at thinking fast when plans went wrong. Most of all, they were good at refusing to die. For 3 days they fought. Jake led every attack. He saved his soldiers again and again. When one path was blocked, he found another. When the enemy thought they had won, Jake proved them wrong. He was shot twice but kept fighting. His soldiers followed him because they trusted him completely. Finally, they reached the weapon facility. Jake placed the explosives himself. As they ran away, the entire building exploded behind them. The terrible weapon was destroyed. The enemy's command center fell apart. Jake had won, but the cost was heavy. Only 12 of his 47 soldiers survived. Jake himself had a bad wound in his side. 3 weeks later, Jake woke up in a hospital. His body hurt everywhere, but he was alive. A doctor told him that the Coalition Council wanted to see him. They wanted to thank him for saving billions of lives. Jake didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and sad for the friends he had lost. The ceremony took place on Centrum Prime, the capital world. Jake wore his military uniform. Medals covered his chest. He walked into a huge hall where hundreds of alien species waited. They all stood and clapped when he entered. Jake felt uncomfortable with all the attention. He was just a soldier doing his job. The council leader spoke. She was a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms. "Captain Morrison, you have done something no other soldier could do. You destroyed the enemy's weapon and saved us all. We want to give you a reward. You may ask for anything within our power. Wealth, land, technology, a high position in our government. Whatever you want, it is yours." Jake looked around the hall. He didn't care about money or power. He had fought for so long. He was tired of war. Then his eyes found something in the shadows at the back of the hall. A woman stood there watching him. She was the most beautiful person he had ever seen. She had pale white skin that seemed to glow softly. Her hair was long and black as night. Her eyes were red like rubies. She wore a black dress that moved like water. She stood perfectly still, but Jake could sense power in her. She was different from everyone else in the room. She was special. Jake pointed at her. "Her," he said. "I want her." The entire hall went silent. Everyone stared at him in shock. The council leader looked confused. "Captain Morrison, that woman is not ours to give. She is Celine Blackwood, a vampire diplomat. She is a free person, not property." Jake's face turned red. He realized how his words sounded. "I'm sorry. I said that wrong. I don't want to own her. I want you to introduce us. I want permission to court her properly if she's willing. That's my reward, the chance to know her." He looked embarrassed but determined. The council members whispered to each other. This had never happened before. A human warrior asking to court a vampire? It seemed crazy. Vampires lived for thousands of years. Humans lived less than 100. Vampires were powerful and dangerous. They usually stayed away from other species. All eyes turned to the woman in the shadows. Celine stepped forward into the light. She walked with smooth grace like a cat. When she spoke, her voice was like music. "The human warrior has fought with honor. He asks with respect. I accept his request. I will let him court me. We will see what happens." Jake felt his heart beat faster. She had said yes. This beautiful, mysterious woman had agreed to give him a chance. He didn't know why she accepted. He didn't know if anything would come of it. But for the first time since the war started, Jake felt hope for something beyond fighting. Celine was actually 847 years old. She looked like a young woman but had lived through the rise and fall of empires. She had seen countless wars, met thousands of people and grown bored with life. Everything felt the same after so many centuries. But this human interested her. She had watched Jake during the ceremony. She saw the scars on his face and the sadness in his eyes. He had fought an impossible battle and won. He had lost most of his soldiers but kept going. That kind of courage reminded her of ancient vampire warriors from long ago. Most people were afraid of vampires. But Jake looked at her with interest, not fear. Also, Jake had been honest. When the council gave him any reward he wanted, he could have asked for anything. Power, wealth, technology that would make him rich. Instead, he asked for a chance to know her. That kind of honesty was rare. Celine decided he deserved a chance. The council looked relieved. They had worried about a diplomatic disaster. Now they were happy. They gave Jake resources to court Celine properly. They gave him information about vampire culture and customs. They gave him teachers to help him understand her people. Jake studied hard. He wanted to do this right. The news spread quickly through the galaxy. A human warrior and a vampire diplomat? People were fascinated. Some thought it was romantic. Others thought it was foolish. Vampires lived forever. Humans died quickly. How could that work? But everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Jake and Celine had started something unusual. No one knew where it would. Jake stood in the diplomatic gardens waiting for Celine. He wore his military dress uniform because it was the only formal clothing he owned. In his hands he held a special flower from Earth. It was called a moonflower. It only opened its petals at night. Jake thought it was perfect for a vampire who lived in darkness. Celine arrived exactly on time. She wore a dark purple dress that made her pale skin glow. Her red eyes studied Jake carefully. She noticed the flower immediately. "A night-blooming flower," she said softly. "You did your research." Jake smiled nervously. "I wanted to show respect for who you are." Celine took the flower gently. "Most people either ignore what I am or become obsessed with it. You found the balance. That's rare." They walked through the gardens together. 3 moons rose above them, painting everything in silver light. At first they talked about simple things. Jake told her about Earth, about the oceans and forests he grew up near. Celine told him about Luna Noctis, her homeworld where one side was always dark. She described cities carved into mountains and plants that glowed with stored starlight. As they talked more, Jake asked about her life. Celine had lived for over 800 years. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had watched technology change from simple tools to starships. She had loved and lost many times. "Don't you get tired?" Jake asked. "Living so long, seeing everything change?" Celine looked sad. "Sometimes. Everything feels the same after a while. But then I meet someone like you and remember why life can be interesting." Over the next few weeks, they met regularly. They had dinner together, though Celine couldn't eat regular food. She drank synthetic blood from a glass while Jake ate. At first, this felt strange to him. But Celine explained that modern vampires had moved past hunting. They had science now. They didn't need to hurt anyone to survive. Jake learned that being around him was hard for Celine. His heartbeat was loud to her sensitive ears. His blood smelled sweet and tempting. Her vampire instincts wanted to hunt him, but she controlled herself perfectly. She never let her nature overcome her choices. Jake respected that control. It showed how strong she really was. They faced many challenges. The biggest one was time. Celine would live for thousands of years. Jake would be lucky to reach 100. This reality hung over them like a shadow. One evening, they talked about it honestly. "I'll be dead in a blink of your eye," Jake said quietly. "How can you love someone knowing you'll lose them so quickly?" Celine was quiet for a long time. "I've asked myself that question every day since we met." She took his hand. "I've lost friends before. Mortal friends who aged and died while I stayed young. It hurt every time. The pain of losing you will be worse because I'll love you more. But Jake, the alternative is worse. If I push you away to avoid pain, I lose you anyway. At least this way, I get to have you for a while." Jake squeezed her hand. "I can't give you centuries. I can only give you my life, however long it is. But I promise every day will matter." Celine smiled, and for the first time Jake saw tears in her ancient eyes. "That's all anyone can promise," she whispered. "Other people caused problems too." Many vampires thought Celine was making a mistake. They said humans were beneath vampires, that mixing species was wrong. Celine's older brother Victor was especially angry. He came to Centrum Prime to confront her. Victor was over 1,200 years old and very traditional. "You shame our bloodline," Victor told Celine. "This human will die in a few decades. What then? You'll have wasted your time on something temporary." Celine stood firm. "Everything is temporary, brother. Even we vampires will die eventually when the stars burn out. Jake's short life doesn't make it less valuable. If anything, it makes every moment more precious." Victor met Jake once. He looked at the human warrior with cold eyes. "You will age and die," Victor said. "My sister will watch you become weak and old. She will bury you and continue living. You will be a sad memory she carries forever. How is that, love?" Jake didn't back down. "Because I'll make those years worth remembering. Because I'll love her with everything I have. That's all any of us can do." Victor left angry, but Celine thought Jake had answered well. She was learning that humans had a different view of time. Because they lived short lives, they understood how to make moments count. They loved harder, fought harder, and lived harder. This intensity was attractive to Celine after centuries of careful, slow vampire life. 2 months into their courtship, terrorists attacked. The enemy species, still angry about their defeat, sent killers to Centrum Prime. They attacked during a diplomatic summit. Bombs exploded. Armed soldiers appeared everywhere. People screamed and ran in panic. Jake's military training took over immediately. He wasn't armed, but he didn't need weapons. He used chairs, pieces of broken equipment, anything he could find. He organized the defense, got civilians to safety, and fought the attackers with cold efficiency. Celine watched her gentle, thoughtful companion transform into a deadly warrior. It was frightening and beautiful at the same time. At one point, an enemy soldier cornered Celine in a damaged hallway. The soldier didn't know what she was. He thought she was just another scared diplomat. But when he attacked, Celine moved faster than human eyes could follow. She disarmed him in one smooth motion and threw him against a wall hard enough to knock him unconscious. It took less than 3 seconds. Jake arrived just as she finished. He had known vampires were strong, but seeing it was different. Celine's movements had been perfect, controlled, and absolutely lethal. She was a predator pretending to be civilized. For a moment, Jake saw the truth of what she was. It should have scared him. Instead, he found it amazing. They fought together through the chaos. Jake's strategy and Celine's power made them an excellent team. They saved many lives that day, but near the end, Jake was caught in an explosion. He took the blast to protect a group of civilians. Shrapnel tore into his shoulder. Blood poured from the wound. Celine caught him as he fell. The smell of his blood hit her like a physical force. Her eyes glowed brighter. Her fangs extended automatically. Her predatory instincts screamed at her to feed. Jake's blood was right there, flowing freely. He was weak and couldn't stop her. For a terrible moment, Celine felt her control slipping. But she mastered herself. With tremendous effort, she pushed her instincts down. Instead of feeding, she tore strips from her dress and bound his wound tightly. Then she lifted him easily in her arms and carried him to safety. Her vampire strength made him feel weightless. She ran faster than any human could, dodging danger until they reached a medical station. Later, in the medical bay, they had a moment alone. Jake was weak from blood loss but alive. He reached out and took Celine's hand. "I saw you almost lose control," he said quietly. "I saw you fight yourself to save me." "Thank you." Celine's hand trembled slightly. "You don't understand how hard that was. Your blood smelled like heaven. Every instinct I have wanted me to drink, but I chose you over my nature." Jake smiled despite his pain. "I saw the real you today. Not the diplomat or the scholar. The predator underneath. And you're even more magnificent than I imagined." Celine felt something break inside her. Some final wall she'd been keeping up. She leaned close and whispered, "I love you, Jake Morrison. For however long we have, I want to spend it with you." Jake's smile grew wider. "Then let's make the most of every moment." They both knew the challenges ahead. The time difference, the cultural barriers, the people who would oppose them. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They had found something rare and precious. They had found love that crossed the boundaries of species and time itself. 3 months after the terrorist attack, Jake decided he wanted to marry Celine. He knew this wasn't a simple decision. In vampire culture, marriage was extremely serious. Vampires usually only married once in their long lives. The idea of marrying someone who would die in just a few decades seemed crazy to most vampires. But Jake didn't care what others thought. He loved Celine and wanted to spend his life with her. Jake spent weeks preparing. He studied ancient vampire customs and talked to vampire elders. He learned that vampire proposals involved a special ritual. The person proposing had to show they understood what they were asking. They had to prove they respected vampire traditions. Jake practiced the ritual over and over until he could do it perfectly. He decided to propose on Luna Noctis, Celine's homeworld. The planet was tidally locked, meaning one side always faced the sun and the other was in eternal night. The dark side was beautiful in a strange way. Plants glowed with soft light. Crystals grew from the ground and sparkled like stars. Ancient vampire cities were carved into the mountains. Jake arranged to meet Celine at the Eternal Garden, a sacred place where vampires had married for thousands of years. He wore traditional vampire formal clothes, which felt strange, but he wore them correctly. He carried 2 gifts. One was a ring made from meteorite iron found on Earth, representing his human heritage. The other was a pendant made from Luna crystal, found only on Luna Noctis, representing his respect for Celine's heritage. When Celine arrived, Jake performed the ancient ritual. He spoke in the vampire language, which he had learned just for this moment. He acknowledged the weight of what he was asking. He presented both gifts as symbols of their union. Then he finished in English. "I know I can't give you centuries, Celine. I can only give you my life, however long or short it may be. But I promise that every day I breathe, I will love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" Celine stood frozen. In 800 years, no one outside her species had learned the ancient rituals. No one had shown such deep respect for her culture. Jake's gesture proved he wasn't just interested in her. He honored everything about her, including where she came from. Tears filled her eyes, something that rarely happened to someone so old. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." News of their engagement spread fast. Reactions were mixed. Many vampire elders were angry. They thought Celine was betraying vampire values. Some argued that marrying a human lowered their species' status. But younger vampires were excited. They saw it as a bridge between vampires and the rest of the galaxy. Celine's family was divided. Her younger sister Helena supported the marriage. Her older brother Victor strongly opposed it. Among humans, most of Jake's fellow soldiers were happy for him. They wanted their commander to find happiness after years of war. But some humans didn't trust vampires. There were conspiracy theories about Celine using Jake for political purposes. Jake's mother, Carol, was worried at first, but after meeting Celine and seeing her son's joy, she accepted the relationship. The coalition government wanted to host a big state wedding. They saw it as a political victory that might bring vampires fully into the coalition. But Jake and Celine refused. They wanted something real, not a political show. Instead, they planned 2 ceremonies. One would follow human traditions on Earth. The other would follow vampire traditions on Luna Noctis. Both would be private, with only close friends and family. The human ceremony happened first. It took place at sunset in a small church in Colorado, where Jake grew up. About 50 people attended. Jake's surviving soldiers were there, along with his mother and family. Celine invited her sister Helena to represent the vampire world. Celine wore a white wedding dress with silver embroidery that mixed human and vampire styles. Jake wore his military uniform with all his medals. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. A military chaplain who had known Jake for years conducted it. When it came time for vows, Jake spoke first. "Celine, you've taught me that love isn't measured in time but in depth. You've shown me universes I never knew existed. I can't promise you forever the way you understand forever, but I promise you all of me, for all my days." Celine's voice shook slightly as she responded. "Jake, in 8 centuries of life I had grown cold. I thought I'd seen everything worth seeing. You reminded me what it means to truly live rather than just exist. Your mortality doesn't diminish you. It makes every moment we share precious beyond measure. I choose you, knowing our time is brief by my count because the depth of love matters more than its duration." When they kissed, several of Jake's toughest soldiers cried openly. The reception was joyful. There was dancing, eating, and many toasts celebrating the couple. Jake's family had prepared synthetic blood for the vampire guests, which touched Celine deeply. Helena gave a speech about how her sister had found something rare and precious. Even the skeptical humans began to see vampires differently after meeting Helena and Celine. 1 week later, they held the vampire ceremony on Luna Noctis in the Eternal Garden. This ceremony was more elaborate and mystical. It followed traditions thousands of years old. By vampire custom, only 13 witnesses could attend. 7 came from Celine's bloodline. 6 were humans that Jake chose from his companions. The ceremony occurred during what vampires called the midnight hour, when all 3 of the planet's moons aligned. The Eternal Garden was beautiful. It was an amphitheater carved from black stone, surrounded by plants that glowed blue-green in the darkness. Both Jake and Celine wore traditional vampire robes. His was deep crimson to honor her bloodline. Hers was silver to symbolize her commitment to something new. The entire ceremony was conducted in the ancient vampire language, which Jake had learned specifically for this day. The ceremony included several sacred rituals. The most important was the blood bond. This wasn't turning Jake into a vampire. It was a symbolic sharing where both made small cuts on their palms and clasped hands, mixing their blood while reciting ancient vows. For vampires, blood was sacred. It represented life, memory, and connection. By allowing Jake to participate, Celine declared him equal in her eyes despite their species difference. The vampire elders present spoke formal blessings over the union. Victor's blessing was especially important. Despite his opposition, tradition required him to support his sister's choice once made. His words acknowledged both the unusual nature of this union and its validity. Celine has chosen a path none of our kind have walked before. Her warrior, this human Jake Morrison, has proven himself worthy through courage and respect. Though their time together will be brief by our measure, the bond they forge honors our traditions. I acknowledge this union. The ceremony concluded with both drinking from ceremonial chalices. Jake's contained wine. Celine's contained blood from sacred vines that only grew in Luna Noctis's eternal darkness. They exchanged rings forged from Luna crystal, which would glow faintly with their body heat. These would serve as constant reminders of their bond. When the ceremony ended, even the skeptical vampire elders seemed moved. Jake's obvious reverence for their traditions and Celine's radiant happiness touched something in their ancient hearts. The celebration that followed was quieter than the human reception, but no less meaningful. Ancient songs were sung and stories were shared. Jake was formally welcomed into the Noctis bloodline as an honorary member, a rare honor for any outsider. Jake and Celine spent their honeymoon traveling to various worlds. They visited Earth's ancient ruins and vampire historical sites on Luna Noctis. They went to neutral worlds where they could just be tourists together. During this time, they talked about their future. They had to decide where to live, whether Jake would continue military service, and how they would handle the reality of his mortality. They decided to make their home on Centrum Prime, where both could pursue their work. Jake would serve the Coalition in a strategic advisory role rather than frontline combat. Celine would continue her diplomatic work. They agreed to face the future as it came, choosing to focus on the life they could build together rather than the end they knew was inevitable. The honeymoon ended with both feeling more committed than ever. They returned ready to begin their married life together. Jake and Celine settled into married life on Centrum Prime. Their home was in the diplomatic quarter, designed to suit both of them. Some rooms could be made completely dark for Celine's comfort. Other rooms had large windows that let in sunlight for Jake. The decorations mixed human and vampire styles, creating something unique that belonged to them both. Jake took his new position as senior tactical advisor. Instead of leading missions directly, he now planned them and trained younger officers. His experience made him valuable in this role. He found the work meaningful, though he sometimes missed the clarity of direct action. Celine continued her diplomatic work with new credibility. Her marriage to Jake made her a symbol of interspecies cooperation. She received many requests to help resolve disputes and facilitate cultural exchanges. Their daily life found a comfortable rhythm. They shared evenings together, discussing their work and challenges. Celine taught Jake more vampire history and language. Jake introduced Celine to human literature and music she had never experienced. They discovered shared interests in strategy games, ancient history, and quiet evenings just being together. For 6 months, life was peaceful and happy. Then Jake discovered something disturbing in an intelligence report. A radical vampire group called the Purists had marked Selene for assassination. They believed vampires should stay separate from other species. They viewed Selena's marriage to a human as betrayal, and feared it would encourage other vampires to form similar bonds. The Purists were led by an ancient vampire named Corvus, who was over 3,000 years old. Jake wanted to increase security immediately. He wanted guards protecting Selene at all times, but Selene refused. She wouldn't live in fear or change her life because of threats. This led to their first serious argument as a married couple. Jake's protective instincts clashed with Selene's independence and pride. "I'm an 800-year-old vampire," she said angrily. "I survived countless dangers before I met you." "Being capable doesn't mean being invulnerable," Jake shot back. "Your death would devastate everyone who believes in interspecies cooperation." "It would devastate me." They argued for hours. Finally, they compromised. Selene would allow some security measures, but she wouldn't hide or stop her work. Jake would investigate the Purists and try to prevent any attack before it happened. 3 weeks later, the attack came. Purist agents struck while Selene attended a cultural exhibition. The attack was sophisticated and well-planned. Multiple ambush points, weapons designed to harm vampires, and timing calculated to catch Selene away from major security. But Jake had been preparing. He had tracked the Purists' movements and anticipated this attack. He arrived with a security team just as the assault began. The battle was fierce. Vampire assassins were incredibly dangerous opponents. They moved faster than human eyes could follow and had centuries of combat experience. But Jake and Selene fought side by side. His tactical thinking and modern weapons combined with her supernatural speed and strength. They worked together perfectly, their different combat styles complementing each other. They managed to repel the attack and capture several Purist operatives, though both sustained injuries. Afterward, as medics treated their wounds, Selene admitted Jake had been right to worry. His preparations had saved her life. Jake acknowledged he had been too protective and needed to trust Selene's judgment more. This crisis strengthened their marriage by teaching them to balance their strengths and listen to each other's concerns. But the threat wasn't over. The captured operatives revealed little under questioning. But Jake's investigation led them to Corvus's location. Corvus's base was in a remote region of Luna Noctis, in an ancient vampire sanctuary that even most vampires avoided. Jake and Selene decided to confront him directly. The coalition offered to send a military force, but they refused. That would only make things worse and turn Corvus into a martyr. Instead, they would go alone to challenge his ideology directly. They traveled to the sanctuary, a fortress carved into a mountain of black crystal. Corvus received them, curious to meet the couple causing such disruption. He was tall and imposing, with eyes that seemed to glow with inner fire. Even Selene felt uneasy around him. His age and power were obvious. This was not someone to take lightly. What followed was more debate than battle. Corvus argued that vampires were superior beings who had weakened themselves by adopting civilized values. He saw the coalition as a cage-limiting vampire potential. Selene's marriage to Jake, in his view, represented ultimate capitulation, accepting a mortal human as equal when vampires were clearly superior. Jake countered that true strength wasn't about dominating others, but choosing one's path consciously. Vampires weren't weak for choosing civilization. They were strong enough to control their nature rather than being controlled by it. Diversity and cooperation made the coalition stronger, not weaker. Isolated purity was actually stagnation. Selene spoke about vampire history in their ancient tongue. She reminded Corvus that their species nearly destroyed itself in ancient times when vampires warred among themselves. Each bloodline claimed superiority. Only by learning to cooperate, first with each other, then with other species, did vampires survive and thrive. "You claim to honor tradition," she said, "yet you forget the most important lesson our ancestors learned. Even the strongest predator can fall to a unified pack of prey. We chose civilization from wisdom, not weakness." The debate lasted hours. Corvus's followers listened intently. Jake and Selene realized they might not convince Corvus himself. 3,000 years of belief didn't change easily, but they might reach his followers, especially younger vampires who had never heard their ideology challenged so directly. Finally, Corvus proposed a challenge. Single combat between Jake and his champion, a vampire warrior named Caney. If Jake won, Corvus would stop attacking Selene and allow vampires to make their own choices about interspecies relationships. If Caney won, Jake would die and Celine would have to return to traditional vampire society, abandoning her marriage. Celine protested immediately. It was unfair. Caney was a vampire with centuries of combat experience and supernatural advantages, but Jake accepted. He knew words alone wouldn't change Corvus's mind. But a human defeating a vampire champion might make a point that philosophy couldn't. The fight would take place in an ancient arena beneath the fortress, where vampires had settled disputes for thousands of years. The rules were simple. Fight until one yielded, was knocked unconscious, or died. No weapons, only natural abilities. The fight seemed hopeless from the start. Caney was faster, stronger, and more durable. He had fought hundreds of battles. The vampire warriors watching expected this to be over quickly, but Jake didn't fight the way Caney expected. Jake didn't try to match the vampire's speed or strength. He couldn't. Instead, he used human advantages, adaptability, unpredictability, and creative thinking under pressure. He used the arena's environment. He turned Caney's expectations against him. He exploited hesitations that came from centuries of fighting opponents who used traditional techniques. The battle was brutal. Jake took tremendous damage, broken bones, severe bruising, blood loss. But he refused to yield. Every time Caney thought it was over, Jake rose again. This resilience, this absolute refusal to accept defeat, was the quintessentially human trait. Celine watched in agony, forced by the challenge's rules not to interfere. She saw her husband being beaten nearly to death. But she also saw the vampires watching begin to react. They had never seen someone fight like this, not with superior skill, but with sheer stubborn determination. The turning point came when Jake managed to grapple with Caney. In close quarters, where Caney couldn't use his speed effectively, Jake's training gave him an edge. He landed a strike that severely injured the vampire. Caney, wounded and shocked, realized he had underestimated this human. He began fighting seriously. The battle intensified. Finally, using tactics only possible with his specific experience, Jake secured a submission hold. Caney yielded. Jake collapsed immediately after, his body finally giving out. Celine rushed to his side as the arena fell silent. Corvus approached, studying Jake's broken form with new respect. "I was wrong," he said. "Not about vampire superiority, but about strength coming only from dominance. This human defeated our champion through refusing to be broken. That is a different kind of strength worthy of respect." He turned to Celine. "Your choice makes sense now. I honor the terms. The purists will not interfere with your marriage. We will reconsider our stance on interspecies relations." Jake managed a weak smile. "Told you I could take him," he whispered before passing out. Celine looked at the assembled vampires. Their mortality doesn't make them weak. It makes them fierce. That's worth more than all the centuries in the universe. Jake spent 3 weeks recovering from his fight with Caney. His injuries were severe. Vampire medical technology combined with human treatments saved his life, but some damage was permanent. He would carry scars forever, and some injuries would never fully heal. But something good came from his victory. Word spread throughout the galaxy. Jake became a symbol proving that courage could overcome impossible odds. Young vampires began questioning purist ideology. Several prominent vampire families formally pledged support to the coalition. More importantly, the relationship between humans and vampires began to shift. Vampires who once viewed humans with contempt now saw them with respect. Humans who feared vampires started seeing them as potential allies. Jake and Celine's marriage, once controversial, became celebrated as a bridge between species. The Coalition Council approached them with a proposal. They wanted Jake and Celine to establish the Interspecies Integration Program. The goal was to facilitate cultural exchange, mutual understanding, and cooperation between species that had historically remained separate. Jake and Celine would serve as co-directors. They accepted, seeing it as a way to give meaning to everything they had endured. The program started small but grew quickly. They organized cultural exchange missions and joint training exercises. They resolved interspecies tensions through diplomacy. Jake focused on practical aspects like security cooperation and military coordination. Celine handled cultural and diplomatic dimensions. Their work took them across coalition space. Species that had warred for generations began talking. Cultural barriers started breaking down. 5 years into their marriage, they faced a difficult question. Did they want children? The issue was complicated. Vampire-human hybrids were extremely rare. Natural conception was unlikely. Medical intervention might work, but what kind of life would a hybrid child have? They spent months discussing this, consulting experts and other hybrid individuals. Finally, they decided to try. After 2 years of treatments and several failures, Celine became pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult. Her vampire biology conflicted with the developing hybrid. She experienced complications that would kill a human mother, but her vampire constitution allowed her to endure. Jake was terrified throughout, knowing he could lose both wife and child. But Celine remained calm. "I've survived plagues, wars, and the fall of civilizations," she told him. "I'm not going to be defeated by biology." Their daughter was born 8 years after their marriage. They named her Luna Morrison Blackwood, honoring both heritages. Luna was remarkable from birth. She had her mother's crimson eyes and her father's human facial features. Her skin was pale but not quite vampire white. She showed unusual abilities immediately. As she grew, Luna inherited traits from both species. She had enhanced strength and speed beyond human normal but less than pure vampires. She could tolerate sunlight but preferred darkness. Luna's existence became almost as symbolic as her parents' marriage. She was living proof that different species could create something new together. The future might lie not in maintaining pure species lines but in embracing integration. When Luna was 5 years old, the enemy launched a massive offensive. The Crethon Collective had spent years rebuilding and developing new weapons. They were determined to crush the Coalition. Multiple frontier worlds fell within weeks. The Coalition faced its greatest crisis. There was serious discussion of surrender, but something unexpected happened. The vampire worlds, which had maintained neutrality, voted to fully join the Coalition military alliance. Led by Corvus, who had evolved from purist leader to pragmatist, vampires argued that the Crethon threatened all species. Corvus addressed the Vampire High Council for millennia. "We stood apart, believing isolation made us strong. But Jake Morrison showed us different strength. He showed us that refusing to yield and standing with allies is true power. If we don't stand with the Coalition now, we condemn ourselves to submission or extinction. I say we fight." The vampire decision changed everything. Their ancient warships and warriors transformed a losing battle into a winnable fight. Jake was recalled to service as strategic advisor for the combined forces. Celine coordinated diplomatic aspects of vampire integration. The war lasted 3 brutal years. Luna grew from 5 to 8 during this time, living with her mother while her father coordinated operations across front lines. Every reunion was precious. Every goodbye was uncertain. The turning point came at the Battle of Nexus Station. The Crethon committed their entire fleet to destroy this critical location. Jake coordinated the defense, commanding combined forces in the largest space battle in history. Ships from dozens of species fought and died together. Jake's brilliance and the Coalition's unity barely held against the onslaught. At the critical moment, Corvus's flagship broke through and destroyed the enemy command ship, turning the tide. The Coalition won. The Crethon sued for peace. The terms were harsh but not vindictive. Lasting peace required more than military victory. Jake returned home, but he wasn't the same. He was now 45 years old. Years of combat had taken their toll. Old injuries from fighting Caney still plagued him. New wounds from the war added to his limitations. He walked with a limp. Pain was his constant companion. More significantly, Jake had to confront his mortality. He was likely past halfway through his life, while Selene hadn't aged at all. They had difficult conversations about what came next. Celine would live for centuries after Jake died. How should they prepare? What did Jake want Celine to do after he was gone? These conversations were painful but necessary. Jake made his wishes clear. He wanted Celine to continue living fully after he died. He didn't want her frozen in grief. "You taught me that even brief time can be meaningful," he told her. "Don't let my death make you forget that." Live Selene? For both of us, after the war, they had 2 decades of peace. They continued their integration work in a less demanding capacity. They watched Luna grow into a remarkable young woman. She studied military strategy and diplomatic relations, following both parents' paths. She faced prejudice from those who viewed hybrids with suspicion, but she found allies across species lines. She began seeing herself not as caught between worlds, but as a bridge connecting them. Jake and Selene traveled during these years, collecting memories together. They returned to Earth, to Luna Noctis, to places where they had first met. Jake aged gracefully but noticeably. By his 60s, he was clearly an old man with gray hair and weathered features. Celine remained exactly as she was the day they met. People often mistook them for grandmother and grandson. They joked about it, but the jokes had edges of sadness. Despite physical decline, Jake's mind remained sharp. He wrote extensively about his experiences, creating a record not just of military career, but of life with Selena. He wanted their story preserved as truth, including challenges and compromises. His writings became foundational texts in interspecies relation study. Celine treasured every moment. She memorized everything about him, creating a treasury of memories that would sustain her through long centuries after he was gone. Jake died at age 73, peacefully in his sleep with Celine holding his hand. He had lived longer than expected given his dangerous career, but it was still far too short by Celine's reckoning. His death was mourned across the coalition. State funerals were held with representatives from hundreds of species, but the most meaningful memorial was smaller. On Luna Noctis, Celine planted a human oak tree in the eternal garden where they held their vampire wedding. It was her tribute to Jake. Something beautiful and strong but temporary, like he was. Celine grieved deeply. For the first time in centuries, she felt her immortality as curse rather than gift. She withdrew from public life, struggling with loss. Luna, now a successful diplomat herself, helped her mother through this dark period. She reminded Celine of Jake's last wish that she continue living fully. Slowly, painfully, Celine rebuilt her life. She returned to work. Channeling grief into making the galaxy Jake fought to create years turned to decades, then centuries. The coalition evolved with humans and vampires working as equals along with dozens of other species. The galaxy became more unified and peaceful. Luna lived over 200 years, not as long as pure vampires, but far longer than normal humans. She had children, creating the next generation of hybrids. By the time she died peacefully, interspecies families were no longer unusual. What Jake and Celine pioneered had become normal. Celine continued on as vampires do. She became a living link to history, someone who personally knew the founders of modern coalition. She told stories of Jake to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive through shared memory. She remained active in diplomacy and cultural work, though her focus shifted toward education and historical preservation. 300 years after Jake's death, Celine returned to Luna Noctis and walked through the eternal garden. The oak tree she planted was now ancient, gnarled, and magnificent. It would only live another few centuries at most, already dying by vampire timescales, but still vital and alive. She sat beneath its branches and spoke to Jake as she did sometimes.
You asked me to live, and I have.
I've loved, I've worked, I've helped build the world you fought for. But I miss you every day. Time doesn't heal that wound. It just teaches you to carry it better.